Show me the crypto. Show me the crypto. Show me the crypto.
In a world on the brink of disruption, two men will bring you clarity by interviewing some of the most intelligent and influential names in the blockchain world. Welcome to Show Me the Crypto with your hosts, Wade Patterson and Ulf Lonergan.
Well, hi there and welcome to Show Me the Crypto. My name is Wade Patterson.
And I'm Ulf Lonergan.
We're a couple of friends from Canada who love learning about cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology, and we're happy you're along for the ride. Whether you're a crypto virgin or you know your way around the block, we hope our interviews with some of the most intelligent and influential people in the blockchain space help deliver you with value. And on this episode, we're joined by Dennison Bertram, co-founder of Tally, which is a platform that provides governance tools for DAOs. Dennison is an avid futurist, artist, and serial entrepreneur with a keen eye for the future of technology and its social impacts. He has a vision that long-term, DAOs will replace corporations as the primary entity that people will elect to use to organize human resources and talent. Dennison, welcome to Show Me the Crypto.
Hello, folks. Thank you for having me. Great intro. I need a copy of that.
Yeah, I'll send it your way after this. We're excited about this conversation because we were chatting before we hit record on the fact that DAOs have been incredibly popular this year, and we're going to get into everything DAOs and Tally. But before we do that, I'm really curious of your background, because my understanding is you were a fashion photographer, you were a filmmaker. So my question is, what was all of that about, and how did it eventually intersect with blockchain?
Yeah, so I was an artist for a long time, and I was based in Europe. And I'd come to become an artist in college. Basically, I was studying political science and economics, and I was I want to do something different. But before that, in high school, I'd been really technical, and I was always hacking and building things. I built my first computer when I was 13 or 14. But it wasn't like the computers that you snap together today. You're you take your GPU and you snap it in. I actually wire wrapped a clone of one of the early Apple computers with the 6502 Motorola CPU. So this is
wow,
really early days. But then I took a break for a long time from doing anything technical. But I found my way back after 2008, which is, I think a lot of people got into started thinking about maybe, there's this great, during the pandemic, someone, or maybe it was somewhere during a Hong Kong protest, someone had spray painted on the wall somewhere in Hong Kong. And I saw a photo of it where it says, what if normal was the problem all along? And that really captured how I felt back in 2008 after the financial crisis, because it was just oh man, I just saw my friends and sort of other people my age just being wiped out, right? They were in debt, they didn't have jobs, et cetera, et cetera. And around 2011, 10 and 11, I had heard of Bitcoin. And I read the white paper. I was I had a background in economics. I was oh my God, of course, right? It just spoke to me in such a strong way. And actually it spoke to me in a vision that is very different than I think it's sort of turning out today, where I really felt that this was the native currency of machines. Machines could transact with one another, but they couldn't send true things at the time. I won't get into that because that'll go into a whole other rabbit hole. But long story short, I actually was just okay, this is clearly the future. I had already transitioned from doing fashion to doing sort of fashion tech. So I was doing this basically a creative technology company. We were helping big fashion brands get into the digital space because at the time I was in Italy, and the Italian fashion brands weren't yet modern, right? They're still very much family-run businesses. With traditional artisans just making things by hand, and the idea that maybe somebody was watching you somewhere on a digital device was just not something that they knew. So I was doing creative technology already, really getting involved in the VR scene. And then in 2012, I created the first Bitcoin exchange, or maybe one of the first Bitcoin exchange in the Czech Republic. And that's when I was just totally hooked. I saw I just ended up spending so much time with other sort of cypherpunks who are just like, oh, this is the future. This is what we're building. Pooled mining was created in Prague by one guy named Slush in Marek, his real name, in Prague. And it's just like, I was totally into it. So that's how I sort of like got hooked. Participated in some of the early altcoins. I was really big into altcoin called Terracoin back in the day. People think that altcoins today are like X, Y, and Z, but there's like been 3 or 4 different waves of entirely different things, right? So I've been in the rabbit hole for a long time. And one of the things that I saw early was how people could organize all over the world using blockchain, right? And sort of, I always kind of think about like how these layer ones, like blockchains, are kind of like DAOs in a strange way, right? Like you collectively have to provide work. At the time, proof of work was kind of the only sort of viable method. You had to like provide work, and you were together with everyone, and you received a reward that was a share of your contribution of like work to the network. And by supporting this network, you enabled different use case on top of it, which at the time was mostly Satoshi dice. So it was mostly just gambling. Right? And that was just, for me, that kind of was the start. And ever since then, I've been working on like one thing or another in the space as it's like really grown up, because it's grown up a lot. It doesn't resemble the 2011, 2012, the decade ago blockchain. People always say, oh, we're so new and so young and so early, which is absolutely true. It's just been crazy to me that I've been saying that for a decade.
Yeah, it's like that's true when you're looking ways out. But if for someone who's been at it for 10 years, maybe it doesn't always feel like that every day.
No, I have to say it feels like that more than ever, actually. More than ever, like in 2012, we were like being like, oh man, we'll be paying for coffee with Bitcoin by September. This is happening right now.
Yeah.
And, 10 years later, you're like, oh yeah, we got a long way to go still. It's really early, So it's funny how the future is like coming, but it's gonna take longer than you think, but like way longer than you think, right?
Yeah.
So
probably in many ways longer and yet shorter at the same time. Things you maybe don't expect to happen as quickly probably will happen. Yeah. Or maybe things we haven't even thought of yet. So
yeah. I remember when the internet first sort of started, my dad got me like an email address in like the early 90s. And it was like getting the first fax machine. We were like, yes. What do I do with this? Right? Like you go into like CompuServe or like AOL, and there would just be like other weirdos that you could like chat to. But then, like the flip over, you went from, there's this, remember internet cafes where you would just like, oh, I want to go use email. I'm going to go to the US Post Office that has coffee. Right. And you'd like go to an internet cafe and you're like, now I'm on the information highway. Right. I kind of lament that there was no era of like, like, oh, I'm going to go use Ethereum. I need to go down to the Ethereum cafe and like, meet the other Ethereum people and like connect to the Ethereum there. Right.
That would have even helped the Ethereum ecosystem when we're talking about getting people together. Who knows? If there was Ethereum cafes, would have just exploded that much more. Yeah. Well, that's awesome. It's great to hear a bit of your background and your involvement so early on. Part of the conversation today is to learn more about Tally, which we're certainly going to get to. But we also want to just maybe start at the beginning, which is DAOs themselves. For those of our audience who maybe aren't so familiar, can you explain like what is a DAO and maybe how does it differ too? Because in your background there, you touched on how even before DAOs were a thing, blockchain was already providing DAO-like properties for its community. So yeah, maybe you can just dive into that a little more.
Yes. So DAO, people love to argue about what it means and like what is or isn't a DAO. the term should, I imagine, stand for Decentralized Autonomous Organization. People take what that means. What is decentralized? What is autonomous? What is an organization? And they like do crypto flame wars over every one of those words, right? Some people are like, no, that's a like decentralized organization, and that's a DAO. It's like decentralized and autonomous, but it's not really organized. People fight over that, but like for me, the idea is it is a group of individuals that can permissionlessly create an organization. And the reason why I like this definition, and I think that it encapsulates a lot of kind of ideas that float in the DAO space, is not all DAOs are free to enter. Like not all DAOs will let you join them, right? So that feels to some people like it's not really a DAO, right? Like not all DAOs are truly like autonomous. You know, it's a small group of people that kind of make all the decisions, pull all the levers. Some of them aren't actually autonomous. I think generally the autonomous part is meant to refer to it being some sort of smart contract that intermediates the organization of the participants. So even if they're all dead, like the organization lives on waiting for new members to like come and like interact with the smart contracts. But for me, it's the idea that anyone can form an organization without asking anyone else for permission. And that is really powerful to me because we don't recognize in our day-to-day life how most organizations require permission from the state to exist, right? When there's a curfew, for example, no more than 3 people are allowed to walk down the street at the same time, right? Which is like, okay, sure, right? In other countries, you creating an organization around, right, like something political is not allowed, right? And sometimes it doesn't have to be political, right? Like you can do the, mothers lactating union, and some countries would be like, no, that looks like a power base of political power, so you're not allowed to like organize like that, right? But even with companies, right, like, and this is very particularly like salient when we talk about DAOs because just if the 3 of us got together and said, okay, we are starting a pickle DAO and we are going to just pickle the world. Everything we can find, we're going to pickle, right? And then we do a crowd fund where we draw pictures of pickles and we like sell them on OpenSea and we raise $1 million, right? And then somebody somewhere eats one of our pickles and then like dies, right? They're going to sue us, and we all have unlimited general liability because the government will be like, okay, you guys came together somehow, so you are this general partnership, and you all have unlimited liability to one another with whatever you do, right? Like one of you could just hold, you could do something absolutely crazy unrelated to pickles, and you'd be like, yeah, this is a pickle DAO thing, and now we all have this unlimited liability, right? And that's like a mechanism to force us to create LLCs or C Corps, right? And then when we do that, of course, we have to ask permission, and now we have to follow a lot of like rules. And to be fair, some of them are in place for good reasons, right? If you look at sort of like the history of America and in the early days where people were like, selling you snake oil and stuff like that, right? Like a lot of these came about for very good reasons. But now if we create an organization together, an LLC or a corporation, there's even more levels of like permission that we have to ask from the state, right? Like you have to ask permission, for example, I go on this one pretty often, but you have to ask permission to hire someone, right? And the government will say, yeah, you can hire him, her, but not them, right? And that is actually very discriminatory, and it's very anti-competitive, and it's very like inefficient, right? Where you're sort of taking this, like the idea of like the imaginary boundaries of the state, saying, and now we're going to apply those to human participation, like human ability to like contribute intellectually. So for me, the idea is that anyone can build an organization in a permissionless way. you and I, we don't even have to know each other. You know, you can be a crypto dick butt, I can be an ugly toad, and we can say we are building the toad dick butt global organization, and nothing can stop us, right? And if somebody wants to join, you know, we can decide what the rules are of the membership ourselves, right? So our community decides what the rules are of membership. And then what we want to do, maybe, you know, one day we want to pickle things or make toads, or maybe the other day we're crowdfunding for space travel, right? But there's no, you know, for example, I lived in Europe for a long time, and when you start a business, you have to pick a category, like what your business is. And for a little while, I was in Turin, and before co-working came to Italy, you couldn't do it because there was no code in the official registry of like things you could do for co-working, right? So I had this friend at the time in Trino, and he created a co-working space, and the city showed up and they're like, what are you doing? He's like, this is, you know, co-working. It's a new idea from America where we all like share space. And they're like, clear, you're a communist, right? You're sharing this office space. And what they did at the time was the rules was, okay, well, because there isn't an entry in this like Rolodex of like the businesses that you're allowed to have, the organizations you're allowed to build, we'll just fit you in somewhere. So you're renting, you know, office space. So that means that you have to have like a fire extinguisher and an escape for each like little office that you rent. And they were like, so every desk needs to have like a fire escape and like a fire extinguisher, all these ridiculous things, right? Which actually put him out of business, because they're like, yeah, you can't do this because we don't recognize this as a thing, right? Which you can imagine instantly how anti-innovation that is, right?
Yeah.
And what you see is that what people now, like, you know, the DAO fire, you know, had been lit a while ago, but it's finally really catching. Suddenly people's ideas went from like, oh, we'll use this to run this like decentralized financial protocol, and oh, we'll make this sort of thing. And suddenly people are like, let's buy a fucking constitution. Right? So suddenly like innovation in terms of like anything that you could possibly organize people around, you start to have people understand that they could organize people around, right? Like, you know, people like to, you know, shit on the ideas of like meme stocks and like Reddit, where you have like all these people like meme magic. And I personally am not like a super big fan of that, but they're missing the point that normal isn't really what works anymore, right? And people want something more. They want a sense of belonging in what they participate in. They want what they do to bring them some sort of value and joy and like sense of like purpose, right? They want to be part of other organizations. And if you think about it, like organizing is kind of a fundamental property of humans just in general, right? Like whether you're deciding to like go buy the Constitution or, you know, do a decentralized lending protocol, right? The spectrum there is enormous. And you see that people are going to fill that space with everything under the sun, right? And that's really, really exciting, because before this, right, like most things are pretty limited to, you know, what are the codes in the list of like what you can possibly do. Oh, I'm a software sales business. I am an advertising business. I am in construction, right? Like, where do you put organized 20,000 people around the world to like buy the US Constitution? Like, what sort of business is that, right? And that's just really exciting. It's really exciting.
Yeah, no kidding. And you touched on this a bit earlier that, you know, at first there was this concept that came about, and now it's been taken to this extreme. But what was kind of the timeline on that? Because it seems like, from my perspective anyways, I spent quite a bit of time in crypto Twitter, but it seems like since kind of the summer, that's when I started seeing a lot more about DAOs and that type of thing. And I'm sure this was a concept, you being deep in the space, were witnessing earlier than that. So how did this, like the actual term or acronym DAO, kind of come about? And what are some examples that you think are really great? Because, you know, we've seen DAOs be put together to purchase certain NFTs, and then you've seen it, like you said, for different protocols. So kind of what was the timeline on DAOs?
Mm-hmm. So first of all, I don't know where the term DAO came from, but I'm sure folks like Koopa Troopa or other DAO luminaries in this space probably do. I don't know where the term came from. Maybe it didn't actually come from anywhere. Maybe it's just like the accurate description of like the thing that we're talking about. And that's just like, oh, it's a decentralized autonomous organization. But I'm sure somebody came up with it. DAOs have existed for a while. And I think you could argue that they exist even pre-crypto, right? Like early computer days, folks were, anytime that people could connect like computers together, they started to make these like networks. I mean, you could start to stretch the idea even further that like, there's a lot of decentralized autonomous organizations, even pre-computers, right? Like, early global political movements, very much decentralized, autonomous. They're sort of on their own organizations. So in a way, maybe this has always been with us, but blockchain is giving a new dimension to it. And the dimension here that I think is very special is that for the first time, a group of people can collectively manage a treasury, like funds, right? And they can collectively make decisive decisions in networks, right? Like when interacting with smart contracts. And that's the powerful thing, right? Like if you think about like the Catholic Church, right? The Pope doesn't actually have the bank account with all the money, right? Like each like bishop or whatever in every little region kind of controls the purse of the Catholic Church in their like sort of region, right? It's like, and the Pope sort of like leads, but he kind of has to like ask nicely, right? If you think about that, like in terms of like a timeline, definitely I think Bitcoin is kind of the first DAO in the sort of like modern blockchain sense, right? Because it's something that people had to build collectively, and all of the effort that goes into it is very much a DAO. There was a big boom of DAO. The sort of like modern incarnation of DAOs is around, of course, the DAO, which people love to talk about at every DAO conference. There's a talk about DAO. I think like, I love the folks who participated in that early on, but they'll be like 70 years old going to like Comic Cons, like signing postcards about like, I don't know if you saw the most recent movie. Oh God, the Val Kilmer movie, and he has a line in it because like he's had like throat cancer or whatever, and he talks about how he goes to these like comic fest, like goes around and just signing like, Batman posters, right? Like, he's no longer that person. And he talks about like, oh, you go around. And so I sort of imagine like the early DAO participants like going around, like signing, yeah, I was at like Slockit, right? Like, but what's funny is that actually kind of like iced DAOs for a while. I have this talk that I give about Magic Internet Society where we build primitives that build on earlier primitives, and that we can build really crazy things because we sort of do the crazy very incrementally, right? So I talk about how we start with like Magic Internet Money, which is Bitcoin. And then once you have Magic Internet Money, you can build Magic Internet Banks, right? Because Magic Internet Banks don't make any sense before you have Magic Internet Money, right? And then once you have Magic Internet Banks, you can build Magic Internet Finance, right? Because suddenly you have all these different banks, and that wouldn't make any sense without Magic Internet Banks, which doesn't make any sense without the money. But then you need organizations to run these things, right? Because these are complicated systems, and that's where kind of like DAOs come in.
Ulf, do you realize our audience has been either watching or listening to this episode for 20 minutes?
20 minutes? No, they should probably subscribe.
Yeah, they should subscribe. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you comment and turn on notifications. And if you're listening to this podcast, especially if you're on Apple Podcasts, leave us a rating and a review.
We're also on Twitter, Instagram, and even TikTok. So go check out the episode description. You can find all that information below. And we have an update on the NFT, don't we?
That's right. We didn't previously mention this, but this NFT for OG supporter is a one of one. There will only be one of this kind ever minted, and we have a few surprises for the person who purchases it. The link is in the episode description.
And back to the episode.
We had the DAO, 2017. We had a big sort of like pow of like the possibility of smart contracts. Ethereum was cheap. We could put everything on chain. We were going to, there's like Aragon building this like big DAO operating system. We imagined putting corporations on chain, and then, bear market came and things got kind of quiet, but a lot of people were still building in the background. People were still experimenting with the idea of organizing. We have other blockchains that are really built around governance, right? Tezos made a big claim about governance. There's what was the one that's just on the tip of my tongue? All right. Well, there's other blockchains where governance is a big thing because people realize that Bitcoin at some point stopped moving forward. And I'm sure people are going to give me death threats on Twitter because I'm saying that. But I was there. I remember it did at some point stop moving forward because the ability to make decisions is really, basically just got stuck. But then people started building new ideas of the DAOs where you had this idea of actual being able to do token voting, for example. Like Compound really sort of ignited DeFi summer a couple summers ago, where they did liquidity, took the idea of liquidity mining and merged it with governance. And you sort of needed it because regulators were starting to notice that crypto was a real thing. And so suddenly they were looking for who to blame. And it's just it's all of us, you can't get us all, right? So then tokens came out, and then all the DeFi protocols saw that, right? And they were oh yeah, that's right. Without governance, without being a DAO, actually we are big targets on our backs, right? Where it's just you can't arrest all the people, right? So then suddenly you just airdrop all the people tokens. You're see, we're all in it together. So you had that happen. And yield farming sort of brought in a new market of people who were oh, you can make money here. But what was happening this whole time is there's another sort of aspect of crypto that had just been slowly building and plotting around, which are kind of the philosophers of crypto in a way, the people who are into the art, who are into the idea of better societies, of the ideas of building really crazy things. And in the sort of bear market in the winter, the crypto winter of 2018 and 2019, people were trying ideas that weren't fully getting traction. But the market size of crypto was growing. So more people were coming in, coming in. And then I think what really happened was, in my mind, sort of a timeline, was COVID, right? And suddenly people who in their day-to-day lives would have normally called, magic internet society a crazy idea, right? They're out bowling and drinking with friends. What are you talking about? Living in your computer in the metaverse. Suddenly, people's real world stuff disappeared, right? And they had this crazy chance to reflect on their life, what normal was what they wanted, right? We talk the media talks so much about the great resignation, how people are just quitting their jobs, where there's just this great social change where people are fuck it, I'm done, right? This is not for me. I'm not happy. And at the same time, you start to see people moving into Web3 being attracted to the idea of self-sovereignty, attracted to the idea of being part of organizations that they wanted to really be a part. And this is really, I think, interesting. And now I'm going to go into a little philosophical rant, but something kind of happens when you have really contentious political moments in your society, and we're totally in the realm of Dennison's opinion, everybody. But when people feel pushed out of real participation in their political society, they go inward, right? And you see this at different points, in America's history, you sort of see after the 60s, where 60s and 70s, where you had this big idea of free love and cults and organizations, and we're going to do whatever we want, and they sort of failed to change society, and they kind of became the problem. That a lot of people went inwards, right? So then you sort of have the rise of a lot of movements about just thinking inwards, finding your inner peace, finding your inner this and that, and that for me, I really interpret as an act of people withdrawing from public life, right? Because they don't have power to change it, right? They don't have power to influence their societies. And frankly, with the last political cycle here in America, I think that was a really strong feeling among people, right? Where even if you agreed with the left or the right, most people didn't like how ugly it got, right? Like being part of any of these things, the internet, like Web 2, was supposed to be this place that was going to be awesome. And we were going to be like in our book of friends, poking one another, like looking at happy pictures of one another. And it like devolved into like partisan ethno anger all the time from the left and from the right and from the middle. And people were just done with it. And when you turned around, in the corner of your eye, there was like Vitalik's pink unicorn, just like out there in the distance, just like beckoning you on. And then suddenly people are like, crazy ideas like, oh, we're going to sell JPEGs, right? Dumbest idea I've ever heard of, right? Like, you're going to sell JPEGs. But we live in a time where the craziest ideas are kind of the only alternative we have left, right? Where, yeah, absolutely, I should be selling my JPEGs. Why the fuck am I giving this shit away for free for, like Facebook for years, right? Clearly, there's value in them, right? Because they're doing something with it. And so you saw kind of, and this isn't really a great timeline, this is kind of like me just talking, but like you saw people suddenly get interested in NFTs. You saw people suddenly get interested in participating in these social communities, right? You had these early social token people, like Alex was a great example where he tokenized himself. And then you saw some companies like, I think like Rally started to like do social tokens where people were like, yeah, you should be able to invest in me. And people started to say like, yeah, why not, right? In the 90s, I remember there was this like idea of like 1,000 true fans where you could be an artist if all you had was 1,000 true fans who like believed in you and spent $100 a year on you, right? And then you could live doing whatever it is that you loved. Well, suddenly with like crypto, the thing that's been missing and the thing that has been missing for all these like the idea of like DAOs is that we were missing the idea that we could organize money together. Right? Like once you can organize money together, suddenly the crazy ideas that you might have wanted to do become entirely possible, right? And that's what we saw. So with COVID, people started trying crazier ideas and they were working, right? Like an example I love to give is like Pizza DAO, where they decided to like make rare pizza boxes and sell them to raise money to like give free pizza away around the world, right? And people laugh at that because it's silly, but behind it, what you see that they actually managed to do was they actually managed to crowdfund a solution to like food insecurity, right? Where we are going to give away food and we're going to do it without that 80% loss that organizations like, I'm not going to name any unless they come after me, NGOs or any of these sort of like charity organizations that like have to take so much to cover their expenses. Suddenly you see these group of people out of nowhere do it for virtually no cost, right? So yeah, back to timeline, you start to see a few crazy ideas pop off. And I think people tried newer, crazier ideas and they just got traction. And it's just become this sort of like rush for everything that you always wanted to do, right? Like I saw somewhere in like the Cool Cat founders, like Twitter, he was saying, he was talking about how thankful he was. And he showed a picture of him, and this might be totally wrong because I just saw it on the internet really briefly. So Cool Cat's founder, please forgive me. But there was like a picture of like a stand at like, I don't know, like a country fair or something. And a guy like selling drawings of cool cats. And he was just like, yeah, that's what I was doing. And then I found NFTs and DAOs and like crypto. And now they're building this organization where like people are creating like cool cat shoes and, they are creating communities around just this like idea, right? So timeline, it was smoldering and then something caught in the past like 2 years. I think really during COVID where people had a chance to like entertain the ideas that they might have on a day-to-day basis, but they're like, oh, that's stupid. They hear like the inner voice of like society being like, that's dumb. You should just go back to your job and keep pushing those papers, right? And people suddenly were like, yeah, but what if you did take the dicks and the butts and maybe there's 1,000 true fans of crypto dick butts, and sure enough, there are, right? And the fact that now that they have treasuries and the ability to like program money is awesome, right? Like that's what takes, most people's zany idea of like, I'm going to buy the US Constitution, right? Like Nicolas Cage had to steal it because he didn't have a DAO, right? Like he couldn't just crowdfund to buy it, right? The tools didn't exist for him. But like, internet Nicolas Cage was like, oh, wait a minute, we could try this, right? Fortunately, they didn't win it, but they didn't win it because some supervillain stole it, right? Like had they just like lost it and we never knew who like bought it from them, maybe people would be like, oh no, this is a failure, DAOs don't work. But fortunately, a supervillain who just like hates crypto and hates like this idea of like people being able to organize like bought it. So now, the like great battle between good and evil continues. But I'll give you another example and then, I'll give you another example and then you can throw more questions at me. A project that I'm always really excited about is Dope Wars, which was like basically I started it, full disclaimer, but I only started it because I saw loot and I was like, oh, I love loot, but there's no governance in it. So it's going to devolve into like infighting and people are going to like not know what to do and like how to like organize themselves because it's so open. So it's like, okay, let's do Dope Wars, which is like a TI-83 calculator game that you play in the 90s. It's like, let's do that, but like, let's put governance in it from the start and we'll fund the DAO from the royalties from OpenSea, right? People got really excited. They flooded into Discord. They actually made all of it on their own, right? Like the community was just like fire. It was wild. Then the contracts got deployed. They sell a lot on OpenSea. They raise like, $400,000 for their treasury. And then they start to like vote, right? And they vote to like pay artists to make the pixel art characters. They vote to refund me for having like deployed the contracts at like the peak of gas costs, which was insane. They vote to support some people building like a Starkware Layer 2 version of it, right? And then those people like delivered on their promises. Now they're voting on making a hip hop album. They're voting on, I think they want to start doing like pixel art sprites, like animations for it. They're talking about like doing some sort of like sandbox land type of thing. But in this process of just like the community coming together, building things and like spending money, they've more than doubled their treasury amount, right? So they had all this money, which looked like that's probably all the money they're going to get, right? Like, because like the first initial boom of interest and that's going to go away. But then people from all over the world are able to participate in this organization to spend this money collectively. And people were like, hey, the guy that did the Pixar is this guy, Mr. Fax. He's just a community member. Said, hey, I love Dope Wars. I love the idea. I made my character from the words of the thing, and this is what it looks like. And people are like, we love it. Let's pay you 10 ETH, like $40,000 to go make the pixel arts for everybody so we can all enjoy it. He was like, I'm in. I think he or someone else were like, I'm quitting my job. I'm just going to work on this DAO thing with you guys with Dope Wars. But today they've more than doubled their treasury. They've deployed something on Optimism. They have something going on Starkware, which is like, moon math, super future stuff. The community just keeps growing and it's entirely organic, right? It's just all these people around the world who are like, we love the idea, right? Like, yeah, sure, I'm in. I'm going to quit my job and like work on this pixel art game where we sell drugs and be mafia. I get really excited about it. Of course, people use DAOs to like run more, prosaic organizations that are yield farming and like, running protocols. But I get really excited when you see that anything that you've wanted to do or you're excited about, if you can find 1,000 other people out there on planet Earth who are interested in this idea, you can build an organization together and you can do it.
I think I love. Thank you, by the way, for going so in depth with both history and stories. I think the stories of like real use cases are what bring a lot of clarity to what a DAO is and how it can be utilized. One of my questions, though, or I got a lot of questions out of that. We've only got so much time, but I'm curious because at the beginning you were talking a lot about how a DAO gives people the ability to, without permission, create an organization. But going beyond creating the organization, what about what about the mechanics of actually running that organization? And you just touched on some of those in your example, but beyond just like actually running it with votes or things like that, what about going back to earlier when you mentioned basically if you're pushing any legal boundaries, or if the government for whatever reason wanted to come after you because they're saying that what you've done is illegal or crosses a line, if you have, you're part of a DAO, great, you had an opportunity to create something, it was permissionless, but if you're not anonymous, and if that organization isn't, thousands and thousands of people, if it's a rather small one, then is there still potential of liability and coming after you and that sort of thing?
I think the short answer is probably yes. So you can't do things that would be a bad idea in the real world anyway, right? Like if you make a DAO for pickling and you don't use gloves and you don't sterilize your stuff, right? That was a bad idea anyway. And, if somebody gets hurt, somebody will have gotten hurt, right?
Yeah.
So it's still important for people to use common sense and try and protect themselves reasonably. People are experimenting with a lot of ways to do this. At Tally, we are also thinking about ways to help people do this. People create LLCs for themselves where the LLC participates in the DAO. People who are using multi-sigs, I highly recommend you get an LLC for that because that is a general partnership. Multi-sigs, when they receive funds, technically you're liable for taxes on it. The government hasn't come after anyone yet because many of the ideas are so wild that they would probably find it embarrassing to come after them. I love giving this example of Rary Capital, which is this DeFi 2.0 group. They have $1 billion or something locked up in it. And one of the things that they've always played up is some of the team members are 13 or 14, right? They're technically children. And you can imagine them making a mistake and losing everybody's money. And then the government being forced to take the side of adult investors as to why they should punish children for having lost the money they gave them, right? You can imagine them being at the docket of the attorney, attorney general or whatever, being okay, who are we going to go after? Well, these children, they hoodwinked all these grown ass adults to give them money and promise them insane returns, right? Will the government go after them? I think probably not, right? Constitution DAO. Does the government really want to step into suing somebody in Constitution DAO for trying to buy the Constitution, right? There's a lot of things where I think the government is probably looking for actual real life criminals, right? Not people experimenting with wild things. Of course, bureaucrats in the IRS may feel differently about this, right? They may go, hey, Constitution DAO, you raised $40 million, so where's our cut? So it is important to start thinking about these things, right? In the past few years, a lot of these were wild ideas, and we're so out on the fringe. For so long in crypto, we were just so far out on the fringe that we could kind of do anything because people just thought we were crazy, right? Magic Internet Money, Magic Internet Banks, Magic Internet Finance, you're all crazy. And then suddenly you wake up and, Elizabeth Warren is how many trillions of dollars? Right. And we're not out in the cold anymore. Right. We are front and center. Right. The fact that so many people entered Web3 for the first time because they wanted to also buy the Constitution really speaks to how we have gone mainstream. And it's a real interesting shift because so many of us in crypto, we never planned for what it'd be like to win, right? And we're clearly winning. Like we are now winning. And I think you'll see a lot of folks go into kind of like paralysis about what to do about that, right? Like when your whole identity was like fighting from the digital caves for so long. But yeah, I think for the risk of these things, it depends, I think, on what you're doing, right? Like if you create, Friends with Benefits is an organization, they throw parties, right? And it's super cool. And I think it's just going to become a cultural behemoth, right? Doodles as well. Like I'm kicking myself for not buying all the doodles in the world, right? But like doodles are crazy. Like there's so many people excited about it. It's like there's the Bored Ape sort of phenomenon where like it's kind of like, kind of like techie bro, white guys like buying Bored Apes, people complaining about it. But all of a sudden there's doodles. And like, I think like the doodle community is like maybe majority women or has a higher percentage of women than anywhere else. And there's like this idea of like, they're building something amazing as well, right? Where the liability is there, right? Like if you hold a doodle party and like the building burns down and everyone fries to a crisp, which would be horrible. You're going to have a rough time. Like there's going to be a liability there. People unfortunately can still make LLCs. Like I don't think that we can get away from that just yet. Like we would like to, but like I would like to be a crypto purist and be like on this podcast being like, fuck the government, just make your organization be totally anonymous. But that's not most people. Like most people want to participate as who they are, right? On the internet, they want to be real people. They want to participate. And that's the sort of like, now that we're winning, what do we do? Right? Like a lot of the sort of like reflexes that we have inside of crypto, where it's just like, fuck the government, we'll all move to Puerto Rico, doesn't translate to like regular people buying doodles and living in their homes in somewhere in America, right? Like they're not going to move to Puerto Rico because their like doodle idea took off and now they don't want to like pay, they have families, they have real lives, right? So this is something that we're going to have to work out. You see groups like Open Law really trying to push forward legislation that supports DAOs. We talk a lot about like the Wyoming DAO law where you can incorporate a DAO directly in Wyoming. I think we'll start to see more and more of this because really DAOs aren't so crazy, right? Like blockchain makes them crazy, right? But they aren't so crazy in that it's not something we haven't seen before. People come together, right? There were other crazy ideas. Let's get together and build a mechanical bird and we'll all sit on it and fly, right? Like that's crazy shit sometime, right? Of course, and there's a liability of like, what if our mechanical bird falls out of the sky and everybody dies, right? And that's what corporations are for. One day, I think DAOs will have that status of corporations, and there will be things that DAOs need to get used to doing to be able to do that properly. And I think a lot of crypto people may feel like, that's a shame that we have to like, file something or do something. For me, I think more of, let's work towards the future where the DAOs natively do the things that they need to be done to be like good citizens in society. Like we're never going to get rid of like the underground macaw assassin DAO, right? Which doesn't exist, internet, by the way, right? Journalists are watching this, right? Like we're never going to fully get rid of that type of idea. But that exists without DAOs anyway, right? Like, bad DAOs, gangs, they exist in the real world. So yeah, I think it's just going to be a process, but it shouldn't put people off from trying their magical, wonderful idea. Like needing to get a lawyer and get your finances in order is like a good problem to have because it means that you had something real, right? Get started on that process a little bit earlier than you would expect. But like that should not stop anyone from like building the next, Bored Ape Yacht Club, right? Like that should be something that like if it works, deal with it then. especially now that everyone's talking about the metaverse as if Zuckerberg invented the idea, right? Like, it's still so early, even though it's not, but it is. That we will solve those things will be solved.
So Dennison, can you tell us about Tally? What's Tally all about?
Yeah, so Tally is we are really focused on making DAOs work. Originally, it was around on-chain governance because when DAOs sort of like first came back with a vengeance, it was really around DeFi. But our vision has expanded, where we really want to help onboard the next million DAOs, right? Like, we think that DAOs are the better form of organizing human capital and energy, right? So instead of building an LLC, instead of building a C Corp, instead of building like a PTA or a block club, we think you'll build a DAO. And we want to be there to help people build DAOs. So we support a large number of kind of the bigger protocol kind of DAOs. But lately we've been really moving strongly into the NFT DAO idea where in protocol DAOs, it's like one token, one vote. But in NFT DAOs, it's one NFT, one vote. Much more human. It gives people a greater sense of participation. So Tally lets you see into the DAOs that you're a part of. So it lets you see the other members, how they're participating, how they're voting. It allows you to create new proposals. Everything we do currently is on chain, but we are working to expand to off-chain solutions to support free voting. People really like the word free, and they really like it when it goes with voting. So we're working to expand to like support more of these use cases. But really our vision is to help people make their ideas real. And we think that one real way to do that is with DAOs. So we are really pushing hard on supporting people to build DAOs.
And then there's that top voters section that I noticed when I was on the Tally. So what's that all about? Is that, and who's recognized there?
Yeah, so top voters, again, this is a little bit of a piece from our earlier DeFi focus, where, kind of all the DAOs were DeFi DAOs. Now we probably need to rework this a bit to represent that there's this explosion of DeFi DAOs, and there's actually this coming explosion of like people-focused DAOs, like human-centric DAOs. So the top voters really represents this idea earlier on in DeFi protocol DAOs was, okay, these systems are too complicated for everyone to actively vote. So what we should have are these protocol politicians who are smarter than us people who sort of like know how the system works and have like good judgment, and we delegate our voting power to them. So rather than me having to show up every day and vote on something I might not understand, instead we delegate our voting power to someone else, and then they show up and they do the voting. So this sort of top voters panel really represented the people who are most active, have the most number of people delegating to them. That used to be primarily, early on, it was the top sort of Gitcoin folks. Then it became the top Uniswap folks. Then it became the top Gitcoin folks. And now it's like the top ENS folks. So we do need to rework that a bit because it's very hard to say how do you measure a top participant in one ecosystem with a top participant in another ecosystem, right? Like sometimes the size of these ecosystems are vastly different. And sometimes the thing that you're asking of these voters is in these ecosystems vastly different. So that's what this represents, but we need to kind of like rework it to take into account now that like the sort of like rainbow of type of like DAOs that are out there is just getting more and more and more colorful.
So tell us a little bit more about the actual tools that Tally provides. Like, do you guys provide, is it a community where there's advice given and there's, guides on how, to support DAOs, or is it actual tools, and what are some of those tools?
So it's a little bit of all of these. We keep a nice wiki about DAOs. It's very DeFi focused, and as I mentioned, we're really moving to start supporting this like wider, more colorful rainbow of organizations that people are creating. traditionally with DeFi protocols that kind of like we support something called the Open Zeppelin Governor Framework, which is sort of like inherited upon like Compound's Governor, which they sort of created this model of governance. And that's now become a standard that's available in the Open Zeppelin contract library. So normally protocols build using the Open Zeppelin library, and then they call us and we just list them because we are natively compatible with that. What we've been building now, and we'll be releasing probably the start of the year, is a new NFT DAO creation tool, totally open source. Anyone can go and play with it. And basically, this is sort of like coming from our learnings working with new DAOs as they get created, and how people want to use NFTs as their participation in a DAO. Right, like something that we noticed early on is that you drive away a lot of participation when one person in your DAO votes with like 1 million tokens and another person votes with like 1. Right, there's the sense of there's like a disbalance that feels unpleasant to participants. Whereas with NFTs, you know, if your Bored Ape or your Doodle or your Punk votes, even if someone else may own 10 or 100 punks, you still possess the sense of my punk voted, right? My Bored Ape voted, my vote, my PFP or my NFT still has participation, right? And partially that's due to the fact that, like, you know, with NFT projects, at most you have 10,000, right? You don't have a situation where, you know, you have this token network and some people can have literally $1 billion worth of tokens and you have 20, right? And that it's not an organization that people feel necessarily driven to vote in, right? Because, you know, what does their vote mean? Like their voice is like a teardrop in the ocean of like, oh, I wish I was really making a difference, right? So what we're doing is we're creating a tool to help people create NFT DAOs. Basically, you can come, you can bring artwork or not. If you don't bring artwork, you have on-chain generated SVGs, which act as your sort of like default placeholder artwork. Because some people want to build NFT DAOs around art. Some people just want the NFTs to represent like a membership ticket, right? A great example is Cabin DAO. Cabin DAO, they like buy land and put cabins on it. And then if you're a Cabin DAO NFT holder, you got to go stay in the cabin, right? So where the NFT doesn't have to be, you know, some beautiful artwork, but it's more like a ticket, a pass. So you're able to bring your artwork or not. And you can set all the parameters of how you would like your governance to work. It'll actually handle the minting and selling of the NFTs in the beginning for you, where you can set what percentage of this initial sale you want to go to yourself versus going to the DAO treasury, right? It uses there's a new royalty standard that is like an EIP. It seems like most people have agreed upon it, where you can set what percentage of the royalties of each sale continue to go to the DAO treasury itself. And then you launch it, and what you get is you get the NFT, you get the governor contract, you get your time lock, you get the royalties set up, and you get the ability to mint. And now what you can do with that is that DAO gets listed on Tally. So you have a place where you can go and do your governance already. You don't have to like build that from scratch. And then you get, there's another open source repo that you sort of plug in your contract addresses, and we'll make that easier in the future, but plug in your contract address and you get like the starter pack for doing your like crowd sale page, like your mint page. And so you can say, okay, here's your button, this is where you mint, and this is how you like participate. But what's really great is we're making easier, right now it's really rough and ugly. It all works, it's great, but now we're trying to like make it really beautiful. But it makes it really easy for you to say, I have an idea, because sometimes people only have ideas. And what we found is that sometimes the hardest part of creating these DAOs is the idea phase, right? But if you create an idea and if it resonates, if you have the tool to like organize people right away, then it can really take off, right? So yeah, with this tool, which we'll be releasing it in the early part of next year. But if you're interested in checking out the repo, people can ping me, and we're happy to share the repo already because it's open source, and we're looking for other people to also participate in building it. But this tool we really think are going to help onboard the next, 1,000, 10,000 folks trying to build communities around some sort of like idea. Because with NFT DAOs, something that really is special versus a lot of the other DAOs that you sort of have out there, where your membership is denoted by how many tokens you hold, is there's a really great infrastructure for NFTs, right? Like, go to Rainbow Wallet, you see all your NFTs. You have marketplaces like Rarible and OpenSea where you can trade and buy them, right? You have tools where you can look at like which NFTs are the most popular, like where people are like buying things or selling things. You have social networks like Try Showtime, right? So we really think that this is the more native structure for building DAOs and communities. I think we'll even see it be more part of DeFi as well. I think that'll like creep back into DeFi as the sort of like learnings from this sort of like trickle back up to like the source. But yeah, that's something that we're particularly excited about.
Awesome. Dennison, you've done such a great job throughout this conversation of really just, like Ulf said earlier, making it easy to understand and using some really great stories as examples. We're almost at the last section. So we ask every guest that we have on Show Me the Crypto the same 3 questions. But I want to ask you one more quick thing before we get there. And I noticed that on Tally, there was a recent feature update that you can now add POAPs, so proof of attendance protocols. And so my question is, because I've gotten a few of these, and so has Ulf, and we're trying to wrap our heads around, like, just in general, in your thoughts, what is kind of the main purpose of a proof of attendance protocol? Is it just almost like if you're equating it to video games or something like that, like an achievement that you've unlocked or something like that, where it just shows that you were there, and historically over time, these will matter on the timeline of, when it talks about metaverse and everything like that, or what are the real purpose of POAPs?
I think Patricio, who created POAPs, probably would answer it better. But I think it's really proof of attendance, like proof you were there. Mm-hmm. And who proves it? Other people who were there, right? And that is a very interesting bridge between the virtual world and the real world, right? Like where I was at this party, man. I have the POAP to show that I was there, right? Like, yeah, some people talk about trading POAPs in the future, right? Like, certainly you can buy and sell Olympic gold medals, like, oh yeah, the guy was there, right? Like, there's a market for like old trophies and things that show you were there. But really, I think that they start to construct a record of like where we were. Mm-hmm. And that's valuable, right? Like when you're trying to understand who is this person, right? Like one of the things that Tally solves, and one of the reasons why we integrated POAPs to Tally, to the profiles, which we're making more and more rich. And remind me to mention our coming Chrome extension. Mm-hmm. But the idea is, when we travel around the blockchain world, you see all these 0x addresses that just don't give you context, right? And folks like ENS are doing a great job of like letting people add more context. But who are you if we're going to govern something together, right? Like if we're going to run something together, I need to have some idea of who you are, right? Like, and whether that comes from looking at what you've done or judging you on what we do together, it's one and the same. But the idea is that what we've done right now together has value because you actually came. And that's important because, especially while we're building something so crazy, there's a difference between the people who are like, you know what, I'll give these crazy people a shot. I'm going to go see what this is about. I think maybe there's something here. And the people are like, fuck it, I'm not going. It's dumb, right? So to be able to say, no, I actually did believe in this idea. So, when it comes to things like being a top voter, being like someone who gets delegated voting power, where people are looking to other people to like take the lead on different aspects of running a DAO, they can look at things like POAPs, among other things, and think, okay, clearly you believed in the crypto dick butt, in the toad, in the Bored Ape, because look, you were there at crypto dick butt Bored Ape Con #1. Clearly, you didn't just jump on because now like Jimmy Fallon owns one, right? Like, And that's important, right? Like, especially where crypto still goes in waves. Like, I think we're getting to that plateau where we're just mainstream and this is just the new reality. But when, crypto winter, a lot of people disappeared, right? When like the money and profit went away, they left. But a lot of people stayed, right? And you can look at their POAPs and you can be like, oh, actually, in the middle of crypto winter, you packed up your stuff and you went to that like Ethereum conference somewhere because the price was down, but you still believed, right? So that's kind of like what I think the purpose of. I think it's very important on these kind of things. I think there's many more types of participation that folks who want to track contributions, how people participate in different ways. But yeah, I think that it's very valuable. And to mention the Chrome extension, so I don't forget, we have a cool Chrome extension coming out soon, also totally open source, where basically you just, any Ethereum address on any site, any page, you can just hover it and it'll tell you how many POAPs they have and like what NFTs they have and like what DAOs they're a member of. And you can go and click through to their tally profile. Because the internet can be a lonely place, right? And like crypto in particular can be kind of a lonely place when you're always interacting with other addresses. So this, I think, is going to go a long way into like making it a little bit more friendly and making it a little bit more metaversy. If I can just throw that topic in there in case anybody's like, oh, great idea, more metaverse. But like giving a little bit more identity to it.
Love it. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Well, Dennison, as I mentioned, we like to end every episode of Show Me the Crypto with the same 3 questions we ask every guest. It's a segment we call You Had Me at Crypto. Ulf's going to ask you those questions.
All right. Here we go. Who's your favorite person to follow in the crypto space?
Austin Griffith.
Cool. Second question. What will the price of Bitcoin be 10 years from now?
$1 million.
It's a common answer. It's a popular answer.
Which means it's probably wrong. Question 3.
I gotta say, I always said that Bitcoin would get to 100,000. We're not that far away.
That's true.
Yeah.
100%.
Oh, when I say we're probably wrong, I mean we're probably underestimating.
I hope so.
Yeah. Okay. Third question. What is the most underrated coin or project in all of crypto?
Other than Tally.
Other than Tally. I don't think we're underrated. I'm partial to Dope Wars, just because I started it and the community is doing amazing things. I'm going to say Dope Wars. I've just been so impressed how, my contribution was really just coming up with the idea and saying, hey, let's do this idea. And they've all built it themselves. They're actually building a game and like building using like crazy moon math and like Starkwares, and they're already on Optimism. They have like fully on-chain generated SVGs, like everything's on chain. Like it's really, really crazy.
That's so cool.
If it wasn't like a project that I was specifically doing, probably WorldCoin, where they like scan your eyeball and steal your retina, right? Because I think people are underrating how like dangerous, unlimited, like perfect identity actually is. So like there's a lot of people trying to build like perfect identity systems. And I think perfect identity systems are a recipe for tyranny of some sort. And I think that, a lot of people try and do it. Like a lot of people do it in a really great way, like, Proof of Humanity was doing it in a really healthy, positive way. But I strongly believe we don't want to live in a world where we have inescapably defined our existence, because that any perfect system is a tyranny of some sort, I think. So yeah, probably that. And then ENS, like I wish it were a little bit cheaper so that it would be more accessible. But that's not their fault. That's Ethereum. But yeah, you owning your own, reference point in the metaverse is extremely, extremely important, right? Like extremely, extremely important. So.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Dennison, for joining Ulf and I on this episode of Show Me the Crypto.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm glad to have been here.
Thank you for listening to Show Me the Crypto. Please make sure to subscribe as well as rate and review this podcast.